Chapter 25 addresses short-term business decisions. So we're going to look at situations in this chapter when we need to make a decision about our organization that's going to take place within the next 12 months or within a year. In another chapter, we'll look at what information we need to utilize for long-term. But just remember, in this chapter, we're looking at what type of information managers need to analyze when they're trying to make short-term or less than 1 year related business decisions. So the different objectives we'll look at is what information is relevant. Okay, so what information do we need to analyze and gather to make these short-term decisions? We will look at situations where we need to decide between offering a product at our regular price or can we provide special pricing decisions for a special order. We'll look at decisions about whether to continue or drop a product or product line or division. We'll look at how to make the best use out of our product mix and sales mix if we have capacity constraints or we're out of machine hours or man hours. We'll look at another decision, when do we know whether to outsource a product or to continue to manufacture it in-house? If we've got a product that has multiple processes, how do we decide when it's cost beneficial for us to continue to process a product versus stopping at a split off point and sending it somewhere else? So let's begin with objective 1 and just looking at what type of information, first of all, do we need to analyze short-term decisions. Okay, so the illustration that your book provides is very interesting here because we're looking at, we have to understand, even though defining business goals is a long-term objective, when we're making short-term business decisions, we need to keep our long-term strategic business objectives in mind. Okay, because our short-term decisions need to be congruent with what we want to do overall as an organization in the long term. So if we've got a decision and we need to decide what is the best course of action. Okay, so do we accept a special order or do we reject that special order? And so come up with what are our different alternatives for the situation that is before us, and we'll look at some of the most common short-term decisions that will be potentially analyzed by you as a manager as we move through this chapter. But if you are a management accountant, this may be the illustration that's most appropriate to you. As a management accountant, you are going to be responsible for gathering and analyzing the financial data that is needed to compare those alternatives. But you also, as an accountant, have to be aware of not just the quantitative side, the qualitative side. What are the qualitative factors that we need to analyze as well, along with our financial numbers? Once we've gathered that information for an analysis, we need to work with management to decide what is the best alternative in this short-term period that will be best for our overall business goals. So what information is relevant? Okay, so when we're talking about relevant information, we're talking about data that is both going to take place in the future, costs that will take place in the future, or revenue, and information that differs among the alternatives. And so if we are trying to decide whether to sell product A or product B, okay, we need to know what the change in sales would be as a result. What are the change in cost as a result that we will incur in the future? Okay, but we need to be very careful, okay, that we only consider the costs that are relevant to this particular decision. And we'll see how that works as we move forward. Now, irrelevant information is information that does not, as your text say, impact this decision. These are often sunk costs. So, for example, your book talks about purchasing a new vehicle. And if you are purchasing a new vehicle, you may have an option to trade in a vehicle that you already have. Well, the price that you paid for that vehicle in the past, or any depreciation that you have taken in the past, is very important as far as financial information is considered, because we need to know the book value of that vehicle. But if we're looking at a short-term decision about whether to trade this vehicle in when we purchase a new vehicle, the price that I paid for it in the past, the amount of depreciation that's been taken in the past, are irrelevant because they are not going to change regardless of whether we keep the vehicle or we trade it in. But what is relevant might be the amount that the organization or the customer that we're purchasing it from, vendor that we're purchasing it from, how much of a trade-in are they going to give us? So we just need to realize that sunk costs are those that have taken place in the past. They cannot be changed. To give you a brief illustration of this, we had a student organization on campus a couple of years ago that was providing a leadership camp, a leadership day camp for high school students. And so the person in charge of this organization had already sent out invitations to high school seniors in the surrounding areas, and about 3 weeks before the event, the participation or reservation for the event was relatively low. And so the person in charge of the organization was trying to decide, do I continue to have the event or do I cancel it because we don't have enough participation? So if we're trying to calculate whether the event is going to break even or not, we need to consider the cost of the mass mail out, the cost of their t-shirts, the cost of their meals, the cost of any door prizes, any cost that's relevant we will need to consider to calculate break even, like we have analyzed in prior chapters. However, if I'm simply trying to decide, do I discontinue this event or continue this event at this point, the only thing that's relevant to continue or discontinue is what are the variable costs. What cost will we spend for their meal, for their t-shirts, for their door prizes? Because the mass mail out has already taken place. It was a very expensive part of the venture, but that money is spent. And regardless of whether we continue the conference or we cancel the day conference, those expenses are sunk. They will not change as a result of our two alternatives. Okay, so we're not saying that those costs are not important in the long run. They're just not relevant to this particular situation. So you have to be able to identify what information is relevant to your particular alternatives and which costs are sunk costs and irrelevant to the decision at hand. Now, once again, we also need to take into consideration any non-financial or qualitative factors when we are analyzing decisions. If we're trying to decide whether to close a manufacturing facility or not and lay off those employees, that can hurt morale. Okay, Walmart is considering closing several of their retail stores throughout the nation. And so they had to consider in that process, what does closing a large retail store in a small area do to the economy of that particular area, and how will that impact employee morale and customer morale and being willing to continue to purchase from them. We need to take into consideration when we're trying to outsource a part or a product. Are we going to reduce our ability to be able to deliver on time? Can we control the quality of a product if we're outsourcing it to someone else? If we're offering discounts to a special customer who's come along and wants to buy a large quantity of our product with a generic stamp on it, well, for this one-time purchase, am I willing to give them a cheaper, lower sales price because it's still profitable, even though it could upset my regular customers and encourage them to take their business somewhere else? So we want to consider both the financial, the quantitative, and also the qualitative data related to our alternatives. So we typically use what your book calls a differential analysis. And so we're simply trying to decide what happens to our income or our contribution margin as a result of the two different or three different, however many we're looking at, different alternatives that we're trying to consider. And this differential analysis is often used in short-term decisions such as the regular and special pricing that I just mentioned, trying to decide whether to drop an unprofitable product, line, division, segment, deciding when to outsource or process further products. So these are all situations when we will use differential analysis, and we will be required to identify what information is relevant to these particular approaches. And so we're going to look at a contribution margin approach to identify variable costs separate from fixed costs, because a lot of times the fixed costs are sunk costs that we cannot control, and they will not change as a result of our alternatives that we are considering, but variable cost will. Okay, take a break, make some notes. We'll come back for learning objective 2.